dawn. October 25, 1944, the sea off the island of Samar in the Philippines. Lookouts on a cluster of small American aircraft carriers strain into the gray light and see something that cannot be there. On the northern horizon, the unmistakable pagoda masts of Japanese battleships are climbing out of the haze. The most powerful surface fleet Japan has left is bearing down on them, and it is supposed to be 300 miles away. Between that fleet and the invasion beaches stand the smallest, thinnest-skinned warships in the United States Navy, and one of them has already turned, alone, straight toward the giants. The American group is called Taffy 3. On paper, it is barely a fighting force at all. 6 escort carriers, slow and unarmored, built on merchant hulls and nicknamed jeep carriers. Screening them, a thin ring of destroyers and even smaller destroyer escorts, the kind of ship's sailors affectionately called the small boys. Closing in on them is center force under Admiral Takeo Kurita, 4 battleships, including the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, 6 heavy cruisers, and a swarm of lighter ships. It is one of the most lopsided matchups in the history of war at sea. The destroyer turning toward that wall of steel is the USS Johnston. Her captain is Commander Ernest Evans, a barrel-chested Oklahoman of Cherokee and Creek blood, known to his crew simply as the Chief. He has perhaps 1,000 men of Taffy 3, depending on the next few minutes, and a ship one fraction the size of what he is steering toward. He does not wait to be told what to do. He orders his engines to full power, lays a smoke screen to hide the carriers, and points his bow at the Japanese fleet. The order he gives is almost unthinkable: attack. To understand how it came to this, how the giants of the Imperial fleet ended up bearing down on 6 little carriers with no battleships of their own to shield them, the story has to back up 5 days to the largest naval battle the world has ever seen. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was a sprawling 4-day collision of more than 200,000 sailors across hundreds of miles of ocean, fought in 4 separate actions at once. Somewhere inside that vast fight, a trap had been sprung, a door left wide open that should have been bolted shut, and it had left the small boys of Taffy 3 completely, catastrophically alone. But first, the man on the bridge of the Johnston. To understand why one destroyer captain would willingly charge an armada, the story has to go back 1 year, to a cold October morning in Seattle in 1943, the day his brand-new ship first came to life. What Ernest Evans said to his assembled crew that morning would sound, just 12 months later, less like a commissioning speech and more like a prophecy of the day off Samar. He had been waiting his whole life for a ship of his own, and he already knew exactly what he intended to do with her. Ernest Edwin Evans was born in 1908 in Pawnee, Oklahoma, of Cherokee and Creek descent. He enlisted in the Navy as a teenager, earned an appointment to the Naval Academy, and graduated in 1931. He had already tasted defeat. Early in the war, he served in the Desperate, losing battles in the waters off Java, forced to retreat again and again before the advancing Japanese. He had no intention of ever running again. When the Johnston was commissioned in October 1943, he told the assembled crew plainly, this was going to be a fighting ship. He intended to take her in harm's way, and any man who did not want to go along had better get off right now. By the autumn of 1944, the war had turned. General Douglas MacArthur had waded ashore at Leyte on October 20th, making good his promise to return to the Philippines. To smash the landings, Japan threw nearly its entire remaining navy into one enormous complex plan. The heart of it was Kurita's center force, sent to burst into Leyte Gulf and destroy the invasion fleet. Standing in its path was Admiral William Halsey's powerful Third Fleet. But the Japanese dangled a decoy, a force of nearly empty aircraft carriers far to the north, and Halsey took the bait. Halsey raced north with the heavy guns of the Third Fleet, chasing the decoy, leaving the San Bernardino Strait wide open behind him. He believed the battleships of the Seventh Fleet were guarding the Gulf, but they were far to the south, low on armor-piercing shells after a night action. No one was watching the back door. In the darkness before dawn on October 25th, Kurita's battleships slipped through the empty strait and steamed south and ran headlong into the only thing left in their way: the 6 little carriers and the handful of small boys of Taffy 3. Both sides were stunned. There was no time to form a plan and no heavy ships to form it around. The Japanese opened fire at extreme range, towering splashes of colored water rising around the carriers as the enemy walked their guns onto the targets. Aboard the Johnston, Evans did not hesitate or wait for permission from above. He broadcast his intentions to his own crew in a steady, driving voice. All hands to general quarters. Prepare to attack the major portion of the Japanese fleet. All engines ahead flank. Commence making smoke and stand by for a torpedo run. Then he drove his lone destroyer directly at the battle line. It was a charge of almost suicidal nerve. To do any damage at all, Evans had to close the range until his torpedoes could reach straight into the fire of guns many times his own. He bent the Johnston through the shell splashes, weaving, laying smoke, his 5-inch guns hammering away at steel they could barely dent. At around 10,000 yards, he loosed his full spread of torpedoes and scored, blowing the bow off a Japanese heavy cruiser and knocking her out of the fight. For one impossible moment, a 2,000-ton destroyer had bloodied a fleet of giants. The giants answered. Heavy shells found the Johnston, tearing through her thin hull, knocking out engines and guns, killing men at their stations. Evans himself was wounded, losing 2 fingers, his bridge shredded around him, yet he kept fighting his crippled ship, and he was no longer alone. Seeing the Johnston's mad, magnificent charge, the other small boys followed her in. The destroyers Hole and Heerman and the little destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts turned and bored straight into the Japanese line, throwing torpedoes and defiance at battleships, buying minutes with their lives. What followed was more than 2 hours of chaos no one watching could quite believe. The destroyers darted in and out of their own smoke. American carrier planes attacked with whatever they had, sometimes making dry runs with no bombs, left simply to draw fire. To the Japanese, peering through smoke and spray at ships that fought so ferociously, it seemed impossible that these could be mere destroyers. Kurita's officers became convinced they were tangling with heavy cruisers, even fleet carriers, and that Halsey's main force must be just over the horizon. The small boys were winning the lie, but courage cannot armor a hull. The Johnston went dead in the water, her engines gone, her guns silenced one by one. Around 9:45 in the morning, she lay helpless, ringed by enemy destroyers firing into her at point-blank range. Evans gave the order to abandon ship. His men went over the side into a sea slick with oil. The captain was last seen alive on the fantail, still giving orders to save his crew. When the Johnston rolled over and sank, Ernest Evans went down somewhere with her. His body was never found. Then something happened that the survivors never forgot. As the Johnston slipped beneath the waves, one of the Japanese destroyers that had pounded her slid past the Americans, bobbing in the water. On its deck, an enemy officer was seen to come to attention and salute the dying ship and the men she had carried. It was a soldier's tribute from one warrior to another, across the worst kind of distance. The small boys had earned the respect even of the fleet that destroyed them. But the larger question, the one that would decide the whole battle, was still hanging in the smoke. Why did the Japanese not simply brush the small boys aside and fall on the helpless carriers and the invasion beaches beyond? This is the part of the story told least often, and if it is the kind of history worth preserving, consider subscribing so these accounts keep finding people. The answer is that they nearly did, and then they did not. Battered, scattered, and convinced he had stumbled into a far larger fleet, Admiral Kurita lost his nerve at the decisive moment. With victory almost in his grasp, he ordered his fleet to break off and turn away. Kurita retreated, and the invasion was saved. To this day, it is called the Mystery of Samar, a powerful fleet turning back from a beaten enemy at the edge of triumph. The cost to Taffy 3 was terrible. The destroyers Johnston and Hole The destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts and the carrier Gambier Bay all went down. Of the Johnston's 327 men, 186 were lost, their captain among them. For his charge, Ernest Evans was awarded the Medal of Honor, the first Native American in the United States Navy ever to receive it, and his ship was given the Presidential Unit Citation, the highest honor a ship can earn. The Johnston vanished into water so deep that for 77 years no human eye saw her again. Then, between 2019 and 2021, an expedition led by former Navy officer Victor Vescovo found her, resting upright on a slope in the Philippine Sea at a depth of 21,180 feet, more than 4 miles down, 62% deeper than the Titanic. It is the deepest shipwreck ever surveyed. The hull number, 557, was still legible on the bow. Her guns were still trained out toward the enemy she had charged. One observer said she still looked as if she were fighting. Vescovo lowered a wreath into the sea above her. Historians have argued ever since about what truly turned Carita back. Was it the suicidal aggression of Evans and the small boys who convinced an admiral he faced a fleet that was not there? Was it bad intelligence, exhaustion, and the fear of Halsey's return? Was it simply nerve failing at the worst possible moment? The records are incomplete, and the men who could have answered are gone. The debate may never close, but the sailors who survived that morning never had any doubt about what their captain and their small boys had bought with their lives. Ernest Evans, the boy from Pawnee, Oklahoma, the captain his men called the Chief, never came home from the sea he fought on. In 1955, the Navy named a ship for him, the destroyer escort USS Evans, so the name would sail again. The fullest account of that morning lives in the book The Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors, which has kept the story alive for a new generation. Evans fought a battle he could not win, against odds no commander should ever face, and by refusing to run, he helped save thousands of men he would never meet. He read the moment, and he charged. If your father, your grandfather, your uncle, anyone in your family served in the Pacific at Leyte Gulf or Samar, aboard a destroyer or a carrier or a landing ship, leave their name in the comments below. Don't just leave the name. Tell us one thing about them. One thing they did or said, or one thing you remember. The men who were there deserve more than a name in a record. They deserve to be remembered as people. Subscribe if you want the next story. There are more of them, and they are still waiting to be told.